Okay, we're starting with the read aloud for 4.06, the second part of it, and I'm going to start back with the Monster Bank and King Andrew's veto. Though the threat of nullification had passed, Whigs were still eager to prevent Jackson's reelection in 1832 and thought they knew how to do it. For years, Jackson, like many Democrats and frontiersmen, had criticized the Second Bank of the United States. Chartered by Congress after the War of 1812, the bank held federal deposits and largely controlled the nation's money supply. But the institution was run by private bankers. To Jackson, the bank, headed by Nicholas Biddle, a wealthy financier from a rich family, represented an elite, privileged institution. He thought it aided the wealthy and penalized ordinary folk by restricting credit. The bank's charter was due to expire in 1836. Jackson's Whig opponents, Henry Clay and Daniel Webster, thought the president would not dare to take a stand against and so important, and they thought so popular, an institution before the election of 1832. They urged Biddle, the bank's president, to apply for the new charter in 1832, although the bank's charter was not due to expire until 1836. Biddle complied, and the bill moved quickly through Congress, coming to Jackson for his signature in July of 1832. Ill and lying on a sofa when the bill was put before him, Jackson sputtered, "The bank is trying to kill me, but I will kill it." And kill it he did. In a searing veto message, he denounced the bank as a hydra-headed monster. He turned the debate about the nation's leading financial institution into yet another defense of the common man against Eastern money and privilege. He rallied that the bank served only to make the rich richer and the potent more powerful, while penalizing the humble members of society, the farmers, mechanics, and laborers, who have neither the time nor the means of securing like favors to themselves. Though the Supreme Court had ruled in 1819 that the bank was constitutional, Jackson questioned the ruling. He asserted that the President and Congress must each be guided by his own opinion of the Constitution. Whigs were stunned by Jackson's response. Henry Clay, running as the Whig candidate for president in 1832, campaigned against the despotism of King Andrew I. The president, Clay contended, had positioned himself above the Supreme Court. Never before had a president so freely overridden the will of Congress. In focusing on the bank issue, Clay and Webster hoped they could move the people to punish the president for running roughshod over Congress so often. They were wrong. In the fall election, the president scored a resounding victory, winning 219 electoral votes to Clay's 49. His impassioned defense of the common man against the monster bank carried the day. Emboldened by his triumph, Jackson moved to stop depositing federal funds in the Bank of the United States ahead of schedule. Okay, so this page here is just the South Carolina's Ordinance of Nullification, an excerpt from that um, ordinance. And we're just not going to read through it together here. So, and then that's Jackson's response. But like I said, you can read through that on your own. We're going to keep going here with the lesson reading. Jackson's Indian removal policies. While Andrew Jackson was a champion of popular democracy, the expanded citizenry he championed was limited to white men. When it came to African Americans and Native Americans, the president, like many people of his time, was convinced they had no part in the democratic process. A slave owner himself, the president bought and sold people of African descent and even wagered them on horse races. Though he adopted an Indian boy whose parents had been massacred by his soldiers, Jackson saw Native Americans as a lesser people not entitled to the same rights as white men. He strongly believed that Indian tribes stood in the way of the right of white Americans to occupy even more land. At Jackson's urging, in 1830 Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, which overturned Indian territorial claims in the East and set up new territory in the West. The act provided lands in present-day Oklahoma for what were called the five civilized tribes, the Creek, Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole peoples. These Native Americans had long been accorded land rights and self-rule in the Southeast. The Cherokee in particular prospered as farmers and tradesmen. Many had adapted Western styles of dress and culture. But when white settlers from Georgia demanded access to Cherokee land, Jackson acted swiftly to move the Indian population out of the settlers' way. The Indian Removal Act did not invite the Indians to move west. It ordered them to move, and to strip them of land to which they had a legal claim. Most Whigs bitterly opposed Jackson's Indian removal policies. Many clergymen insisted that Indians had souls and rights too. Tennessee Congressman Davy Crockett, known as an Indian fighter himself, heaped scorn on Jackson for this oppression with a vengeance. But with the debates over the bank, tariffs, and internal improvements, Jackson steamrolled his opponents. Okay, let's just read here a little bit here. Some Native Americans resisted the U.S. government's efforts to force them from their lands. In 1835, in Florida, many Seminole people, led by Osceola, chose to fight rather than move west. They used tactics of guerrilla warfare, such as quick surprise attacks. They were aided in their fight by some African Americans who had fled to avoid enslavement. The fighting continued for years. In 1837, Osceola and other Seminole leaders agreed to a truce and went to meet with the U.S. general. But at the meeting, the general ordered their arrest. Osceola was imprisoned in South Carolina, where he died. Although the fighting continued on and off, many Seminole were killed or captured and forced to move west. Okay. So starting up here on the top. Some 15,000 Cherokee Indians were forced to abandon their lands and move west. By some estimates, roughly a fourth to a third of these men, women, and children perished during the journey along what became known as the Trail of Tears. Jackson's brutal policy toward Native Americans may seem inconsistent with his advocacy for the common man, but the two went hand in hand. Jacksonian Democrats viewed widespread land ownership for a growing free white population as the foundation of American democracy. Abundant land meant that every white man could be a self-sufficient farmer and be master of his own economic and political destiny. By this reasoning, if Native Americans occupied prime land, they must be removed for the benefit of white homesteaders. To make all white men equal, Jackson found it necessary to trample on the rights of Indians. Van Buren and the Panic of 1837. Following the custom set down by George Washington, Andrew Jackson declined to run for a third term in 1836. The presidential election was won by Jackson's hand-picked successor, Martin Van Buren, who had served as a U.S. Senator, as Secretary of State in Jackson's first term, and as Vice President during Jackson's second term. Known as the Little Magician, Van Buren was a skilled New York Party politician who had engineered much of Jackson's economic policy. But Van Buren quickly ran into trouble, partly as a result of Jackson's bank veto. In 1837, many banks closed, and the value of investments declined sharply. The Panic of 1837, as it was known, toppled the country into a depression. Many people lost their jobs as businesses closed. As inflation pushed prices so high that people struggled to afford the basic necessities, the American economy descended into a long downward spiral. Whig critics blamed the Depression on Jackson and Van Buren. They had caused the economic crisis, as Whigs charged, by killing the Bank of the United States and moving federal deposits into rickety state banks. Despite the crisis, Van Buren stuck to his laissez-faire principles. He believed the government should keep hands off and let the economy take care of itself. But the Depression continued for years. A new mass political culture. As so often the case in American politics, in the midst of an economic decline, the public punished the party in power by electing a candidate from the opposition party. In the spirit of the age, the Whigs ran their own man of the people for president in 1840, the Western Indian fighter William Henry Harrison. On November 1811, General Harrison defeated a confederation of Shawnee Indians who were allied with the British at Tippecanoe Creek. During the War of 1812, his forces later killed their leader Tecumseh. Whig campaign managers dipped into the Jacksonian bag of tricks. They played up Harrison's war record and coined a catchy slogan, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Harrison's vice president, running mate, was Virginia legislator John Tyler. They wrote songs and organized parades. Seeking to attract the common man, the Whigs' log cabin and hard cider campaign proclaimed that Harrison was born in a simple frontier cabin. In fact, he was the son of a wealthy Virginia landowner, though he may have lived some years in a modest dwelling. Whig organizers gave away little glass log cabins filled with whiskey from the Pittsburgh distillery of E.C. Booze. This was the origin of the American slang term booze for whiskey. Their tactics worked. Tippecanoe won and voter participation increased dramatically, up from about 58% of eligible voters in 1828 to about 80% in 1840. Harrison's victory in 1840 ended 12 years of uninterrupted rule by Jackson's Democratic Party. Was this the end of the age of Jackson? Not by a long shot. Both Whigs and Democrats fully understood that the popular politics was here to stay. The expansion of the franchise, which means the vote, in 1820s and the spirit of popular democracy in the 1830s had turned politics into a spectacle of mass participation and in some ways almost a form of national entertainment. Henceforth, candidates for office would have to appeal to the popular beliefs, prejudices, concerns, and hopes. The days of government by John Adams' legend longed for natural aristocracy were over. Politics now belonged to the people. Okay, so we're back here to the online lesson. So looking at what we next have to do, make sure you have your reading guide filled out and check it with the lesson answer key. This online activity, it says optional. And then we have to complete the nullification. What was it? Online activity. Complete the Andrew Jackson and Modern Political Parties online activity, and then complete the checkpoint. So a couple of last things yet to do in the lesson. So the nullification, what was it? Let's take a look at that. Okay. The theory that a single state could declare a federal law void if it believed the law was unconstitutional led to a crisis in the Jackson administration. Read each statement and decide whether it describes something true or false about the nullification crisis. Nullification meant that individual states could declare federal legislation invalid in that state. That is true. Next question. As a slave owner himself, Andrew Jackson supported nullification. That was false. John C. Calhoun of South Carolina became a supporter of nullification, although he had been a nationalist earlier. Okay, did he become a supporter of the nullification? True. Nullification was an issue of federal authority versus states' rights. That is true. Nullification called for the states to approve or nullify each piece of federal legislation. No, not exactly each piece of state legislation. Slavery was part of the nullification issue since high tariffs affected southern plantation owners and they wanted to nullify those tariffs. That was true. Nullifiers formed a political party of their own to campaign for their beliefs. They did not. Andrew Jackson supported the concept of the federal union over states' rights. Yes, he did. The nullification crisis was resolved by compromise legislation proposed by Henry Clay. That is true. Okay, that was the last question on this one. And then Andrew Jackson and modern political parties. Okay, looking at this one. The Democratic Party began using the symbol of the donkey during the election of 1828 when Andrew Jackson's opponents referred to him as a jackass. He kept the symbol because he thought it showed strong will and determination. Select other events that occurred during the election of 1828 and remain elements of the modern American political party system. Okay, Native American voting rights? No. Universal suffrage for white men? Notion that anyone can be president? Dirty politics of rumors and innuendos. Women gain the right to vote? No. Campaigning for the popular vote? Yes. Voting by African Americans? No. Electors chosen by popular vote? Campaign songs and slogans, emphasis on the common man. Yes, an elector is chosen by the popular vote when we check our answers, and it is correct. Write the following word down. You'll need it to receive credit for completing this activity. Politics. So I bet you that's going to be something for your checkpoint. Finishing up here. Yep. Enter the word you received at the end of the Andrew Jackson and Modern Political Parties online activity. So this is the end of the recording for the 4.06 lesson read aloud.